Have you ever wondered why some men struggle their entire lives despite talent, opportunity, or even intelligence? The truth is not in what they lack, but in the habits they embrace every single day. Today, we're exposing the 6 unmistakable signs of a stupid man, so you can recognize them, avoid them, and rise above mediocrity. If you want to live a life of wisdom, purpose, and real success, this message is for you. A man who talks more than he listens reveals more about his limitations than his confidence. Speech was given to communicate, but listening was given to understand. When a man dominates conversations, interrupts instruction, and rushes to speak before processing what is being said, he blocks the flow of wisdom into his life. Listening requires humility, and humility is the foundation of growth. A man who cannot listen believes he already knows enough, and that belief becomes the ceiling that limits his progress. Wisdom often comes quietly, wrapped in correction, experience, or uncomfortable truth. But the man who is addicted to his own voice will miss it every time. He speaks to impress, not to improve. He answers questions that were never asked and defends positions he has never examined. Such a man mistakes noise for knowledge and confidence for competence. True understanding does not announce itself loudly. It waits patiently for the one disciplined enough to hear it. Silence is not emptiness. It is space for insight. The man who learns to listen gains access to perspectives beyond his own, while the man who refuses to listen becomes trapped inside his limited thinking. Over time, his words grow repetitive, his ideas stale, and his influence weakens because people eventually stop offering wisdom to someone who never receives it. Listening is the price of leadership, and any man unwilling to pay that price disqualifies himself from growth before he even begins. A man who repeats the same mistakes while calling it life has confused patterns with destiny. Failure itself is not foolishness. Unexamined failure is every mistake carries instruction, but instruction is only useful to the man willing to pause, reflect, and adjust. When a man walks the same destructive path again and again, choosing the same habits, the same reactions, the same relationships, and the same excuses, he proves that experience alone does not produce wisdom. Time does not mature a man, decisions do. Without reflection, years merely pass while character remains unchanged. Such a man speaks of bad luck, unfair circumstances, and difficult people, never realizing that the common factor in every repeated failure is himself. Responsibility is the turning point between stagnation and growth, but it is also the point most avoided. To admit a pattern is to admit personal authority over change, and that realization frightens the undisciplined mind. Repetition without correction becomes a lifestyle, and eventually the man begins to defend his cycles rather than break them. He normalizes dysfunction, calling it reality, and lowers his expectations to match his behavior. Wisdom, however, studies outcomes. It asks why results keep returning unchanged. It understands that change is not emotional regret, but strategic adjustment. A man who learns once evolves, while a man who refuses to learn relives the same chapter under a different name. Progress demands that mistakes be confronted, not comforted, and until a man accepts responsibility for his patterns, he will continue to confuse motion with movement and familiarity with growth, remaining busy but never advancing, experienced but never transformed, aging in years yet stagnant in character, trapped in cycles he has the power to end but has not yet decided to confront. A man who rejects discipline while demanding success is at war with reality. Discipline is the bridge between intention and achievement, and no bridge can be crossed by wishful thinking. When a man desires progress without structure, he is asking life to reward disorder. He wants results without routine, promotion without preparation, and influence without integrity. This mindset reveals impatience rather than ambition. Discipline is not restriction, it is alignment. It organizes time, energy, and focus so that effort produces results. The undisciplined man resents consistency because it exposes his lack of commitment. He begins many things but finishes little, confusing enthusiasm with dedication. He waits for motivation instead of training his habits, not realizing that motivation follows discipline, not the other way around. Every successful outcome is preceded by invisible repetition, and repetition demands obedience to process. A man who avoids discipline avoids accountability. because discipline measures progress and exposes excuses. Without discipline, talent becomes unreliable, potential remains dormant, and opportunity slips away unnoticed. Structure is not the enemy of freedom, it is the path to it. A man who submits to discipline gains control over his time, his impulses, and his direction, while the man who rejects it remains ruled by comfort, drifting between desires without ever building the capacity to sustain success. A man ruled by emotion instead of wisdom hands the steering wheel of his life to impulse. Emotions are natural, but they are temporary, and temporary forces should never govern permanent decisions. When a man reacts before thinking, speaks before understanding, and decides before evaluating consequences, he creates instability in every area of his life. Emotional reactions feel powerful in the moment, but they weaken judgment over time. Anger blinds perspective, fear shrinks possibility, and pride blocks correction. Wisdom, on the other hand, creates distance between feeling and action. It pauses, assesses, and chooses a response rather than surrendering to impulse. An emotionally reactive man confuses intensity with strength, believing that passion justifies behavior. He apologizes often but changes rarely, repeating emotional cycles that damage trust and credibility. People learn to walk carefully around him, uncertain of which version will appear, and inconsistency erodes respect faster than failure ever could. Emotional control is not suppression, it is mastery. It allows a man to feel deeply without being driven blindly. Wisdom understands timing, tone, and restraint. It recognizes that power is proven not by explosion but by composure. A man who cannot govern his emotions becomes vulnerable to manipulation, provocation, and regret, while a man guided by wisdom remains steady under pressure, clear in conflict, and deliberate in decision-making, understanding that self-control is not the absence of feeling but the presence of command, and that leadership begins the moment a man learns to rule his inner world before attempting to influence the outer one. A man who despises correction yet clings to opinion builds his life on sand, not stone. He rejects guidance because it challenges his pride, and he elevates personal opinion because it flatters his ego. The problem is not that opinions exist, they do, but that he worships them as truth without testing them against experience, knowledge, or wisdom. A man who refuses correction isolates himself from growth. Advice, mentorship, and honest feedback are not threats. They are tools for refinement. When he resists these, he confuses independence with stubbornness. He believes that to accept counsel is to surrender authority, not realizing that real authority comes from informed judgment, not uninformed certainty. Every man who builds a legacy of ignorance first refuses the wisdom freely offered by others. He surrounds himself with echo chambers, voices that mirror his own beliefs, and he celebrates validation over verification. Such a man mistakes agreement for understanding and popularity for insight. His convictions are shallow because they are untested, and his decisions are fragile because they are insulated from truth. Wisdom challenges. It provokes discomfort, yet discomfort is the crucible of transformation. A man who despises correction remains unshaped, easily misled, and perpetually unprepared for the consequences of choices he makes in isolation. The world does not reward opinion, it rewards discernment, reflection, and the courage to submit to truth even when it stings. Those who cling to opinion over instruction will find their lives limited not by circumstance, but by their refusal to learn, and they will wonder why opportunity bypasses them while others advance because they listened, adapted, and improved. A man who lives for pleasure while ignoring purpose drifts through life like a leaf in the wind, reacting to every gust but never charting a course. Pleasure is fleeting, immediate, and seductive, and a man who chases it as the highest good sacrifices his future for temporary satisfaction. He invests time in entertainment, indulgence, and comfort while neglecting the cultivation of character, skill, and vision. Purpose demands sacrifice, but pleasure offers instant gratification, and the undisciplined man always chooses ease over excellence. He confuses busy activity with meaningful progress, filling his schedule with things that excite the senses but contribute nothing to his growth. The pursuit of pleasure without purpose erodes depth, ambition, and resilience. A man without purpose is reactive. He drifts from trend to trend, relationship to relationship, and moment to moment, never building, never achieving, never leaving a mark. Vision requires clarity, planning, and the courage to prioritize the important over the comfortable. The man who ignores this truth will eventually feel emptiness despite temporary joys, frustration despite frequent indulgences, and a sense of futility despite constant motion. Pleasure can exist alongside purpose, but it must never dominate it. Purpose directs energy, shapes decisions, and defines legacy. A man who discovers why he exists and what he is meant to contribute will endure sacrifice, reject distractions, and navigate life with intentionality, knowing that short-term comfort cannot replace the long-term fulfillment that comes from living a life aligned with a higher calling. Without purpose, even success feels hollow, and even achievement feels incomplete, because the man is building a house without a foundation, climbing a ladder with no destination, and walking a path that leads only to repetition rather than significance. Now you know the truth. A man's words, actions, choices, emotions, and priorities reveal more about him than anyone else ever could. Talking more than listening, repeating mistakes, rejecting discipline, letting emotions rule, clinging to opinion over correction, and living for pleasure without purpose. These are the traps that keep a man from greatness. But the good news is, awareness is the first step to change. You can choose to listen, learn, practice discipline, master your emotions, accept correction, and live with purpose. Every moment is an opportunity to become better than yesterday.